a millionaire owner of the city's famous rodeo, plans to use the fiercest horse to get rid of his wheelchair-bound wife. But the cruel plan turns into a scene no one could predict, as what the horse did left everyone speechless. Before we dive in, if you, like us, are a sucker for a heartwarming animal story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single one. Thanks. Now, back to our tale. The late afternoon sun painted the sky above Willow Creek with hues of amber and gold, as the dust kicked up by the horse's hooves danced in the air like tiny shimmering diamonds. Beatrice watched the rodeo bustle from her second-story bedroom window in the sprawling ranch house, her fingers drumming softly on the arm of her wheelchair. 10 years had passed since she herself had ridden in that arena, the undisputed queen of the local rodeo circuit. The window's reflection showed a woman in her early 40s, her still striking features framed by chestnut hair that was beginning to show a few silver threads. Her green eyes, once sparkling with determination, now held a melancholy she tried, unsuccessfully, to mask. Outside, she could see Frank, her husband, overseeing the preparations for the annual Willow Creek Rodeo with his usual commanding presence. "Mrs. Beatrice?" The gentle voice of Martha, the housekeeper, interrupted her thoughts. "Young Billy's here again. He asked if you'd like to see him." "Send him in, Martha, and please bring him a snack." Thunder was the new black stallion Frank had bought for a fortune, known for his wild and untamed temperament. No cowboy had managed to stay on him for more than a few seconds, which only added to his legend and the rodeo's ticket sales. "He's not mean like everyone says," Billy mumbled between bites. "He's just scared. Last night, when no one was looking, I got close to him. He let me touch his nose." Beatrice felt a pang in her chest. Billy had a natural gift with horses, just as she had before the accident. She remembered what it felt like to have the wind in her face as she rode, the unique connection she had with each animal she mounted. Now, her inert legs prevented her from even approaching the stables, a direct order from Frank, who considered her presence there inappropriate. The sound of firm footsteps in the hallway made Billy shrink back instinctively. The door burst open, and Frank strode into the room, his face twisted into a look of displeasure at seeing the boy. Frank laughed scornfully, a cold sound that echoed through the room. "Your house? And what do you contribute to this house besides medical bills and social embarrassment?" "Get out!" Frank advanced menacingly, causing Billy to back toward the door. "And don't you ever come back here, you insolent brat!" When Frank left, slamming the door, Beatrice turned her gaze back to the window. The sun had now completely set, painting the sky blood red. In the horizon, dark clouds were gathering, foreshadowing a storm. Something in the air felt different, as if fate was about to take an unexpected turn in her life. The morning of the big rodeo arrived, with a cool breeze carrying the scent of fresh brewed coffee and hay. Beatrice woke up early, as she always did, watching the sunrise through her window. Her thoughts drifted back to 10 years ago, when she was known as the Rodeo Queen. Back then, her life was completely different. She remembered the day she met Frank during a competition where she had taken first place. He was there, applauding on his feet, his eyes gleaming with admiration and interest. The courtship was quick and intense, culminating in a wedding that the whole town talked about for months. How different those times were, she murmured to herself, as Martha helped her with her morning routine. The housekeeper, who had been with the family for over 20 years, was one of the few people who really knew both sides of the story. The accident. Beatrice closed her eyes, the memories of that fateful day still vivid in her mind. It was supposed to be just another performance, another victory. The horse was restless, but she always had a special gift for calming even the most difficult animals. Except that day. Martha squeezed her shoulder gently, a gesture of silent solidarity. Outside, the sounds of the rodeo began to come to life. Cars were arriving, people were talking animatedly, and the smell of popcorn already filled the air. Beatrice smiled, gently touching the petals. The boy had a heart of gold, something increasingly rare to find these days. She remembered her own father, a simple man who taught her everything about horses and about life. "Treat others and animals well," he always said, "and they will return the favor tenfold." A sudden noise in the hallway startled both women. It was Frank, talking in hushed tones with someone. Beatrice recognized the other voice. It belonged to Ricky Sanders, a cowboy known for his unscrupulous behavior and shady past. Beatrice's heart raced. Over the past few days, she had noticed Frank acting strangely, having secret conversations and casting calculating glances in her direction. A sense of unease settled in her chest. "No, Martha, I can't hide forever. Besides," Beatrice hesitated, her hand unconsciously gripping the arm of the wheelchair. "I need to see Thunder. Billy's been talking about him so much, and something tells me I need to be there today." "Honey," he said, his voice sweet as poison, "today is a special day. I've prepared a special spot for you, right next to the arena." Outside, the crowd was already filling the stands. The sun was high in the sky, and the dust danced in the air like thousands of tiny diamonds. In the arena, the cowboys were preparing for the show, and the horses were neighing in their stalls. It was then that Beatrice saw him. Thunder, the majestic black stallion, was in his stall, his intelligent eyes watching everything around him. For a moment, their gazes met, and Beatrice felt something inexplicable, a connection she hadn't experienced since her days as a rodeo star. The rodeo grounds buzzed with the contagious energy of the crowd. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy mingled with the aroma of packed earth, creating that unique atmosphere that Beatrice knew so well. Frank positioned her in what he called a prime location, close to one of the arena entrances. The strong afternoon sun beat down on her face, and she couldn't help but notice that she was strangely isolated from the rest of the spectators. Billy circulated discreetly among the people, always keeping a watchful eye on Beatrice. He had noticed Ricky Sanders, the cowboy with the bad reputation, whispering with other men of suspicious appearance backstage. Something in his young heart told him he needed to stay alert. The crowd cheered enthusiastically. Frank went up to the main stage, his impeccable suit gleaming in the afternoon sun. His smile was wide, but his eyes remained as cold as ice when they passed over Beatrice. More applause and shouts of approval. Beatrice watched everything with a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. Her eyes were drawn again to the stall where Thunder was. The black horse seemed restless, but not in the aggressive way everyone described. There was something different about his behavior, as if he also felt that something was about to happen. Martha appeared discreetly beside Beatrice, bringing a glass of water and a worried look. "Mrs. B, I overheard more strange talk. Ricky Sanders was saying something about the right moment and making it look accidental. The first competitors performed, drawing oohs and ahs from the audience with their daring maneuvers. Beatrice, however, could barely concentrate on the spectacle. Her eyes alternated between Frank, who remained on the stage with an increasingly strained smile, and Ricky Sanders, who seemed to be creeping closer to her position. Billy also noticed the suspicious movement. The boy slipped through the crowd, getting as close as possible to Beatrice without being noticed. His heart was racing. He knew something was wrong, very wrong. The imposing black stallion was led into the arena, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. His movements were a mixture of strength and elegance, reminding Beatrice of the horses she used to ride in her glory days. "Mrs. B," Billy whispered urgently, managing to get close to her. "Something's wrong. I heard them talking. They're going to—" The crowd began to scream in panic. Frank, from the stage, maintained an expression of false horror, but his eyes gleamed with a macabre satisfaction. Billy shouted and tried to reach the chair, but was restrained by one of Ricky's cronies. As she rolled toward her seemingly fatal destiny, Beatrice closed her eyes. 10 years of frustration, fear, and resignation flashed through her mind in an instant. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of the impact everyone expected, there was a moment of absolute silence. When Beatrice opened her eyes, she found herself face to face with Thunder. The immense black stallion stood before her, his ears perked and his deep eyes fixed on hers. There was no fear, no aggression, just a serene curiosity that contradicted everything they said about him. The arena was completely silent. Thousands of people held their breath, expecting the worst. Frank, still on the stage, had his mask of concern transformed into an expression of disbelief. This wasn't the ending he had planned. "Hey there, friend," Beatrice whispered softly, extending her trembling hand toward Thunder's muzzle. The horse tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the situation. Then, to everyone's amazement, he took a step forward and gently touched his muzzle to the palm of her hand. The moment between Beatrice and Thunder seemed to exist in a bubble outside of time. She felt something awaken within her, a connection she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if the horse could see through her physical limitations, recognizing in her the rodeo star that still lived in her heart. "You're trapped too, aren't you?" she murmured, stroking the animal's muscular neck, "trapped in the expectations of others, in the stories they tell about you." Thunder whinnied softly, as if he understood every word. But when two men tried to approach, Thunder positioned himself protectively beside Beatrice, his ears laid back in a clear warning sign. The horse, known for his aggressiveness, now became an unlikely guardian. Billy, unable to contain his excitement, jumped the fence and ran to them. To everyone's surprise, Thunder allowed the boy to approach, maintaining his protective stance over both of them. Before Billy could continue, Frank appeared in the arena, his face a mask of false concern. "Honey, what a scare you gave us. Ricky was very careless. He will be duly punished for his negligence." "It wasn't negligence, it was deliberate," she said, her clear and firm voice echoing through the arena. "Just as it wasn't an accident that you put me exactly in that spot, was it, Frank? The only thing that's left me confused these past years was believing that I deserved your contempt," Beatrice replied, her hand still resting on Thunder's neck. "But now I see clearly as this untamable horse sees through the lies they tell about him." Chaos began to erupt. Several people in the audience began to speak out, confirming that they too had seen Ricky Sanders's deliberate act. Frank, seeing his plan completely unraveling, took a few steps back, his face losing color. The afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the arena as the confusion spread. Ricky Sanders, seeing that the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to escape discreetly, but was prevented by a group of cowboys who, outraged by his conduct, surrounded him. Billy, gathering all his courage, climbed onto one of the arena fences. His young voice, amplified by the acoustics of the location, cut through the turmoil. "I heard everything. Mr. Frank paid Ricky to hurt Mrs. B. I was in the stables when they planned it." "I believe him," declared Martha, stepping forward. The housekeeper, normally discreet and quiet, now emanated a surprising strength. "Over the past few days, I've overheard several suspicious conversations. You weren't as careful as you thought, Mr. Frank." A murmur of indignation swept through the crowd. People began to rise from the stands, sharing their own observations. An elderly lady reported seeing Frank handing money to Ricky in the back of the arena. A popcorn vendor confirmed hearing the conversation about making it look like an accident. Beatrice remained in the center of the arena, still protected by the imposing presence of Thunder. The horse, sensitive to the growing tension, remained alert but serene beside her. It was as if his presence gave her the strength to face that moment. Beatrice's words seemed to embolden others to speak out. Former ranch employees began to report cases of animal abuse and financial irregularities. It was as if a dam of long-held truths had finally burst. His words were interrupted by the sound of sirens. 2 police cars had just arrived on the scene, alerted by concerned spectators. The officers quickly took control of the situation, separating Frank and Ricky from the rest of the crowd. "Actually, we do have proof," Billy said, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. The old and scratched device had been a gift from Beatrice, given so that he could record the stories he loved to invent. "I recorded everything they said in the stable last night." The officers approached Frank and Ricky, pulling out the handcuffs. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with seasoned eyes, addressed Beatrice. "Ma'am, we'll need your formal statement down at the station." "Looks like even the animals recognize the truth when they see it," commented the sheriff, visibly impressed. But for Beatrice, something told her it wasn't an end, but a new beginning. Looking at Thunder, who remained faithfully by her side, at Billy, who displayed a radiant smile, and at all the people who were now approaching to offer their support, she felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, as if nature itself was celebrating that moment of justice. The shadows of the past began to dissipate, giving way to a future that, although uncertain, promised to be much brighter than Beatrice could have imagined. The next morning dawned clear and fresh in Willow Creek. Beatrice woke up early, as she always did, but there was something different in the air. The ranch house, once suffocating with Frank's oppressive presence, now felt lighter, as if it could finally breathe. Martha entered the room, carrying a tray with breakfast and the local paper. On the front page, in bold letters, it read, "Rodeo Scandal. Rancher arrested for attempted assault on wife." Beatrice scanned the report, which narrated the events of the previous day and mentioned the ongoing investigations into other irregularities on the ranch. "The police were here bright and early," Martha informed, adjusting the curtains to let in more light. "They want to examine the documents from Mr. Frank's office. Looks like they uncovered some financial irregularities as well." "Mrs. B!" Billy's lively voice echoed down the hall, followed by the sound of his hurried footsteps. The boy burst into the room carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "You gotta see Thunder today. He's different, calmer. It's like he knows he helped change everything." Martha pushed her wheelchair along the ranch paths, with Billy skipping alongside, excitedly telling her about how everyone in town was talking about the events of the previous day. Employees passing by stopped to greet Beatrice, many offering words of support and respect that had long been silenced by fear of Frank. As they approached the stables, Thunder whinnied softly, as if greeting their arrival. The imposing black stallion, who until the day before was feared by all, now approached the fence with gentle curiosity. "He's been waiting for you," said a familiar voice. It was Pete, the ranch veterinarian, who had always treated the animals with special care. "You know, Beatrice, in all my years of practice, I've never seen anything like what happened yesterday. It was as if Thunder could see beyond appearances, just as you always did with horses." Beatrice reached out, touching Thunder's velvety muzzle. "Maybe it's because we both know what it's like to be judged unfairly," she reflected. "People saw only violence in him, just as they saw only limitations in me." The mention of the ranch made Beatrice look around. The place that for so long had been a source of joy, then of pain, and finally of fear, still held a special beauty. The well-kept stables, the arena where so many dreams had been realized, the verdant pastures that stretched to the horizon. "You know, Billy," she said, a smile forming on her lips, "I've always believed that horses have a special gift for healing wounded hearts. Maybe it's time to transform this place into something new, something that can help other people find hope, just like Thunder helped me." "Exactly," replied Beatrice, her mind already beginning to formulate plans. "A therapeutic riding center where people with disabilities can find strength and confidence through contact with horses. And also a home for horses like Thunder, who have been misunderstood and need a second chance." At that moment, as the morning sun bathed the ranch in its golden light, Beatrice felt a certainty grow in her heart. The scars of the past were still there, but now they served as a reminder not only of the pain, but also of the strength she had found to overcome it. 3 weeks had passed since the events of the rodeo. The ranch was immersed in an atmosphere of change and renewal. Beatrice had officially taken over the management of the place with the help of a council formed by Pete, the veterinarian, Martha, and some old and loyal employees. On that particular morning, a small crowd gathered in the main courtyard of the ranch. Beatrice had called a meeting with the community to present her plans for the transformation of the place. Her heart was racing, but it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. The attentive eyes of the audience encouraged her to continue. Billy, sitting in the front row, smiled proudly. Beside him, Thunder watched everything from his new special paddock, built so that he could participate in the ranch's events without feeling confined. The Willow Creek Equine Therapy and Rehabilitation Center will be a place of healing, Beatrice continued. A space where people with disabilities can find strength through connection with horses, where misunderstood animals can have a second chance, and where the community can come together to celebrate not domination, but partnership with these magnificent animals. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Pete stood up to present the technical details of the project. The old rodeo facilities would be adapted to create safe and welcoming therapeutic spaces. The main arena would be transformed into several smaller areas, each dedicated to different types of therapy and activities. As Pete spoke, Beatrice noticed a group of people timidly approaching from the back of the courtyard. They were families with children and adults with different types of disabilities, whom she had especially invited to the meeting. All eyes turned to Thunder, who walked majestically to the designated area, guided only by Billy's gentle voice. The stallion, once known for his ferocity, now moved with a serene grace. A little girl in a wheelchair, who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, raised her hand tremulously. Can we get close to him?" "This," said Beatrice, "is just the beginning. Each of you has a place here, whether as a volunteer, participant, or supporter. This ranch now belongs to the community." The news took Beatrice by surprise. The mayor, an energetic woman in her 60s, made her way through the crowd. "Beatrice," she said, extending her hand, "your proposal is exactly what our town needed. We have resources earmarked for inclusion programs that have never been adequately utilized. I'd like to discuss how we can work together." At that moment, looking at the people gathered, hopeful families, excited employees, Billy radiant beside Thunder, Beatrice felt she was witnessing not only the transformation of the ranch, but the birth of something much larger. It was as if all the pieces of a puzzle were finally beginning to fit together. The first rays of sun were still painting the horizon when Beatrice arrived at the Equine Therapy Center that September morning. 2 months had passed since the meeting with the community, and the place was almost unrecognizable. The old rodeo facilities had given way to welcoming and adapted spaces, with access ramps, specialized equipment, and common areas. "Good morning, Mrs. B." Billy ran towards her carrying a clipboard. The boy, now officially her assistant, took his new role very seriously. "We have 5 new patients arriving today, and Pete wants to show you the results of Thunder's tests." "Martha left the adoption papers on your desk," he continued, his voice trying to hide his anxiety. The process for Beatrice to officially become his legal guardian was underway, and each new signed paper brought them closer to becoming a real family. They followed him to the main stable, where Thunder greeted them with a soft whinny. The black stallion, once a symbol of fear, was now the star of the therapy program. His gentleness with the children and his patience with people with disabilities had surprised even the most skeptical. "Mrs. Beatrice," Pete, the veterinarian, approached with a wide smile. "Thunder's tests are great, and I have more news. That mare we rescued from the circus last month, she finally let someone approach. Guess who?" The morning advanced quickly. One by one, the new patients arrived for their first session. There was Clara, a 7-year-old girl with cerebral palsy, Mr. Joe, an elderly man recovering from a stroke, and the autistic twins, Luke and Matthew, who for the first time demonstrated an interest in something beyond their own world. Beatrice watched each session attentively, her heart filling with joy at each small progress. She remembered her own journey of healing, of how the encounter with thunder had changed everything. Now she could see that same magic happening with others. The news landed like a weight in Beatrice's stomach. Even from prison, Frank was still trying to maintain his control over the place, but something had changed in her. The fear was quickly replaced by determination. As if to confirm her words, a positive commotion erupted near the therapeutic arena. Clara, the girl with cerebral palsy, had managed to sit upright alone for the first time while mounted on one of the ponies. Her parents were crying with emotion, while the physical therapist explained how the movement of the horse had helped strengthen her muscles. Billy appeared running, his eyes shining with excitement. Mrs. B, the rescued mare, star. She let Marina, that lady with depression, pet her. The psychologist said it was the first time she'd seen Marina smile in months. The social worker, who had arrived discreetly, observed everything with interest. Beatrice saw her making notes on her clipboard, nodding in approval as she witnessed the natural interaction between Billy and the animals and the welcoming environment they had created. Beatrice put her arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him into a hug. That's because sometimes we need to go through storms to find the rainbow, Billy. The important thing is not to lose hope during the rain. Frank's petition has no legal basis, the attorney explained, adjusting her glasses. He's trying to claim mismanagement of the property, but the numbers speak for themselves. The center is not only self-sustaining, but it has expanded its services and generated more jobs than the old ranch. Furthermore, continued Dr. Amanda, we have dozens of testimonials from families benefiting from the program, medical reports proving the effectiveness of the treatments, and the official support of the mayor. Frank is playing his last desperate card. The hearing is scheduled for next week, but I received an interesting call earlier today. Dr. Amanda paused dramatically. Frank's ex-wife, Lucy, contacted us. She wants to testify about his patterns of abusive behavior and his questionable financial practices during their first marriage. Ma'am, Pete interrupted, knocking lightly on the door. Sorry to interrupt, but I think you need to see this. His mother, Sandra, was crying silently with joy, while the occupational therapist documented the historic moment. Billy was nearby, ensuring the boy's safety, his face shining with pride. The question hung in the air, charged with emotion. Dr. Amanda quickly pulled her phone from her pocket and began filming the scene with Sandra's permission. This, she said, is exactly the kind of evidence we need to show the judge. At that moment, a familiar car parked at the entrance to the center. It was the social worker, arriving for another follow-up visit to Billy's adoption process. The boy, upon seeing her, automatically stood a little straighter, but without leaving his post beside Luke and Thunder. The social worker, Mrs. Cecilia, watched the scene for a few minutes before approaching Beatrice. You know, she began with a gentle smile, when I started following this case, I had my doubts. A single woman in a wheelchair wanting to adopt a street kid. But now, she gestured, encompassing the whole environment. Now I see that sometimes the most unlikely families are exactly the ones we need. Beatrice felt her eyes fill with tears. Billy isn't just the son I chose, she said, her voice choked up. He's a fundamental part of all this. His gift with animals, his sensitivity with the patients. This place wouldn't be the same without him. As if to confirm her words, at that very moment, Luke let out a laugh, a pure and joyful sound that made everyone present turn in surprise. The boy, still mounted on Thunder, pointed at Billy, who was making funny faces to keep him engaged in the activity. The news hit Beatrice like a wave of pure joy. Amidst all the turbulence caused by Frank, here was a bright ray of sunshine, a confirmation that, despite the challenges, they were on the right track. The news of Billy's adoption approval spread quickly through the Equine Therapy Center, bringing a wave of joy that infected employees and patients alike. At the end of that afternoon, Martha organized a small, impromptu celebration in the central courtyard with cake and soda for everyone. The word family echoed in Beatrice's heart with an entirely new meaning. Looking around, she saw not only Billy, but an entire community that they had built together. Martha, with her maternal care. Pete, always dedicated to the animals, the committed therapists, and each patient who had become part of this large, extended family. "Mrs. B," called Pete, approaching with an envelope in his hands. "This just arrived from the veterinary lab in the capital. They're the test results for Star, the rescued mare." "More reason to celebrate," said Martha, already thinking about how to adapt one of the stables for the future mom. "This farm is getting more and more full of new life." Lucy arrived in town, the attorney informed, accepting a piece of cake, and she brought with her a whole file of documents from the time she was married to Frank. Records of suspicious transactions, threatening emails, proof that he already had a history of abusive behavior. She saw the report about the equine therapy center in the capital newspaper, Dr. Amanda explained. She said she spent years feeling guilty for not having denounced Frank before, and that she couldn't remain silent seeing him trying to destroy something so important to the community. Beatrice smiled at the boy's simple wisdom. "Exactly, son. Sometimes the wounds of the past need time to heal." Beatrice held Sandra's hand, sharing her emotion. "It's amazing how horses can open doors that we thought were locked forever." As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Beatrice gathered Billy and Martha for a quiet moment next to Thunder's stable. The black stallion approached the fence, gently resting his head on Billy's shoulder. "And now you have not only the horses back," replied Billy, his eyes shining, "but a whole family, human and animal." Twilight advanced, bringing with it a gentle breeze that carried the aroma of fresh hay and wildflowers. In the nearby stable, Star rested peacefully, her future foal a promise of more joy to come. The old rodeo arena, now transformed into a healing space, seemed to shine with the last lights of the day, as if nature itself blessed that place of new beginnings. The eve of the court hearing dawned with a gentle mist covering the fields of the equine therapy center. Beatrice woke up earlier than usual, her heart heavy with the responsibility of the day to come. As she passed through the kitchen, she found Martha already preparing a hearty breakfast. Billy ran into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, his hair tousled. "Mrs. B, Star is restless today. Pete is already with her in the stable." Thunder, from the stable next door, whinnied softly, as if to confirm Pete's words. Beatrice approached him, finding comfort in the serene presence of the stallion who had changed her life. A silence charged with meaning filled the environment. Lucy, Frank's first wife, took a step forward, her hands slightly trembling. Dr. Amanda began reviewing the documents that Lucy had brought, her eyes gleaming with each new discovery. "This is gold," she murmured. "It proves a pattern of behavior that stretches back for years." The morning advanced with a feverish intensity. Patients arrived for their regular sessions, ignoring the climate of tension that hung in the air. In the therapeutic arena, Clara, the girl with cerebral palsy, managed to stand upright alone for the first time, supported only lightly on the back of a pony. In the early afternoon, an unexpected delegation arrived at the center. It was a group of representatives from the Regional Equine Therapy Council, coming especially for a last-minute evaluation. For 3 hours, the team toured every inch of the center, observing sessions, verifying documentation, and interviewing employees and patients. Beatrice, accompanied by Pete and the therapeutic team, answered each question with the confidence of someone who knows their work deeply. At the end of the inspection, the coordinator gathered everyone in the main office. "In 15 years evaluating equine therapy centers," she began, "I have rarely seen a place that so perfectly combined technical excellence with genuine love for what it does. Our opinion will be not only positive, but enthusiastic. As the sun began to set, Lucy asked to have a moment alone with Beatrice. The two women headed to the garden, where the aroma of the afternoon flowers created an atmosphere of serenity. Beatrice nodded, deeply understanding those words. "Tomorrow," she said, "we won't just be defending an equine therapy center. We'll be defending a place where broken people can rebuild themselves." The day ended with an impromptu gathering on the porch of the main house. Martha had prepared hot chocolate for everyone, and Billy was handing out homemade cookies. The legal team reviewed the last details for the hearing, while therapists and employees shared stories of transformation they had witnessed at the center. Amid all this, Beatrice watched the starry sky, feeling a strange peace. Tomorrow would be a decisive day, but something in her heart told her that, regardless of the outcome, they had already conquered something that Frank could never take from them, the certainty that they were on the right track. The Willow Creek courthouse had never been so busy. Dozens of people crowded the hallway leading to the courtroom, patients of the Equine Therapy Center and their families, employees, volunteers, and even curious onlookers who had followed the story in the local newspapers. Beatrice, elegantly dressed in a navy blue suit, remained serene in her wheelchair with Billy by her side, wearing his first tie, a gift from Martha for the occasion. Dr. Amanda organized her documents one last time, while Lucy waited nervously on a nearby bench. The judge, a middle-aged man with insightful eyes behind his thin-rimmed glasses, took his place. On the opposite side of the room, Frank entered escorted, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide his bitter expression. His lawyer, Dr. Michael, carried a thin file, a stark contrast to the amount of documents that Beatrice's team had gathered. "We are here to evaluate the petition for administrative review of the Willow Creek Equine Therapy Center," began the judge. "Mr. Frank Almeida alleges mismanagement and mischaracterization of the original property. The defense may begin." It was then that Dr. Amanda made her first strategic move. "Your Honor, I would like to present the complete financial report of the center, audited by an independent firm." She handed a file to the judge's assistants. "The numbers show not only financial sustainability, but a 40% growth in the generation of local jobs." The judge examined the documents carefully, his eyebrows rising as he read certain passages. "Interesting. I see here that the center serves 60% of its patients free of charge through agreements with the city and state." The coordinator who had visited the center the day before presented a compelling testimony about the technical excellence of the facilities and the team. Her words were precise and professional, but carried a genuine admiration for the work performed. The next witness was Sandra, mother of the autistic twins. With tears in her eyes, she described her children's transformation. "Luke didn't speak, didn't smile. Today he sings, 'Your Honor.' He sings." "The pattern is always the same, Your Honor," she said, looking directly at the judge. "He destroys everything he cannot control. He did it with me, he tried to do it with Beatrice, and now he wants to do it with a project that helps hundreds of people." Dr. Amanda then presented her final card, a video compiling testimonies from patients, families, and professionals from the center. The images showed people of all ages and conditions finding hope and healing through contact with the horses. "In 20 years of magistracy," he began, "I have learned that the law, although it seems cold on paper, must serve justice and the common good. What I see here is not the mischaracterization of a heritage, but its evolution into something much more valuable." Frank stood up abruptly, but his lawyer pulled him back into the chair. The judge continued. "The documents presented, the testimonies heard, and above all the proven social impact of the work performed leave no doubt. I deny the petition for administrative review and determine that the Willow Creek Equine Therapy Center continue under the current management." The room exploded in applause and hugs. Billy jumped into Beatrice's lap, crying with joy. Martha, who watched from the front row, wiped away tears with her embroidered handkerchief. The Equine Therapy Center was illuminated by the golden light of the late afternoon when the caravan of cars returned from the courthouse. The news of the victory had spread quickly through the city, and dozens of people were waiting in the main courtyard to celebrate. A large banner with the words "Justice Prevails" was hanging at the entrance. As soon as Beatrice arrived, she was greeted by a shower of rose petals thrown by the children of the project. Pete came running towards her with an even bigger smile than usual. The little foal, with a coat as black as night and a small white star on her forehead, tried to take her first clumsy steps beside her mother. Star, the mare who had arrived so frightened from the circus, now displayed a serene look of maternal pride. The impromptu celebration extended throughout the late afternoon. Martha, with the help of volunteers, organized a table of treats in the courtyard. The patients' families brought more food, transforming the occasion into a true community festival. He had never shown interest in art before, Sandra explained, moved. Now he spends hours drawing the horses. This means, she explained, that in addition to the resources we have already allocated to the project, the center now has legal guarantees of protection and continuity. Beatrice felt her heart clench as she thought of her father, the old cowboy who had taught her everything about horses. What did the will say? The news brought tears to Beatrice's eyes, not for the inheritance itself, but for knowing that her father had thought of her future. Billy, realizing her emotion, ran to hug her. The sun had already set when thunder began to whinny in a peculiar way. Everyone turned to see the majestic black stallion approaching the fence, where little Hope, supported by her mother Star, took her first steps in the pasture. Beatrice watched the scene with her heart overflowing with gratitude. The Equine Therapy Center, which had been born from a moment of despair, had become a beacon of hope not only for her, but for the entire community. The stars began to dot the night sky, and the soft lights of the center created an almost magical atmosphere. Children ran through the courtyard, laughter echoed through the air, and the occasional sound of the horses' whinny completed the symphony of joy that filled the place. A year had passed since the historic victory in court. The Willow Creek Equine Therapy Center flourished more than ever on a sunny spring morning. The old rodeo facilities had been completely transformed, with new therapeutic spaces, sensory gardens, and common areas that harmonized perfectly with the surrounding nature. Beatrice watched the preparations for the celebration of the first anniversary of the renovated center. Billy, now 13 years old and a few inches taller, coordinated a team of young volunteers who helped decorate the main courtyard. The little foal born on the day of the court victory had transformed into a graceful young mare. Under Billy's patient care, she had become the perfect symbol of the work performed at the center. An animal born in a moment of transformation, growing to help others transform as well. The center had become a training hub in equine therapy, receiving professionals from all over the country interested in learning its innovative methodologies. The program developed by Beatrice, combining traditional techniques with a deeply humanized approach, had drawn the attention of even international experts. Thunder, now with a few white hairs mixed in his black coat, remained the soul of the center. The stallion that everyone feared had become a natural therapist, especially sensitive to patients with deep traumas. His special connection with Beatrice remained as strong as ever, as if both shared a mutual understanding born of their own stories of overcoming. "Mrs. Beatrice," Pete approached hurriedly, "we just received confirmation from the Department of Health. Our program has been approved as a national reference in equine therapy." Luke and Matthew, the twins who had made so much progress, arrived with their mother Sandra for the party. Luke, who previously didn't speak, now couldn't stop talking about his art classes. His paintings of horses had even been exhibited at the municipal library. It was Lucy, who after testifying at the trial had found the strength to rebuild her own life. She now coordinated a support project for women victims of domestic violence in a neighboring town, and often brought her assistance for therapy sessions with the horses. As more guests arrived for the celebration, Beatrice allowed herself a moment of reflection. She remembered the day of the accident 11 years ago, when she thought her life was over. She remembered the years of darkness under Frank's oppressive rule, the fear and loneliness. But then her eyes landed on Billy, her son of the heart, who now explained excitedly to a group of visitors how Hope had learned to interact with autistic children. She saw Martha, who more than an employee had become an indispensable part of her family. She watched Pete, caring for the animals with the same dedication as the first day. She contemplated each familiar face that passed, patients, families, employees, volunteers, all part of a large family united by the purpose of healing and transforming lives. Thunder approached the fence, gently touching his muzzle to Beatrice's shoulder, as he always did when he sensed her pensive. She smiled, stroking his mane. "You know," she said to the horse, "sometimes I think you knew from that day in the arena exactly what you were doing, as if you could see beyond the moment all the good that could be born from that instant of connection." "Mom!" called Billy again. "It's time for your speech." As Billy pushed her chair toward the makeshift stage where dozens of smiling faces awaited her, Beatrice felt deeply grateful. Grateful for every challenge that had brought her there, for every person who had been part of her journey, for every horse that had helped heal wounded hearts.